in our culture as yoginis, there is still a lot of shame. I think we're living in a culture that's extremely critical of the way we look, of the way our body is shaped, of our cellulite, of the color of our skin or the shape of the curls on our head. And at the same time, we're trying to live a practice that encourages you to separate yourself from that. And that's really hard to do. So I think there's a lot of pressure to still be a Western body in so many ways and to subscribe to all these norms, but at the same time, be in tune to your body's natural way of being, which is really challenging.
Namaste. You're listening to the Sivana podcast. Join us on an exploration of Eastern spirituality, yoga philosophy, and conscious living for the new age. This podcast is a production of SivanaSpirit.com, the best place to shop for unique clothing, spiritual handcrafted jewelry, healing gemstones, and fair trade gifts from the Far East. Now, here's your host, Brett Larkin.
Hello, my friends. Welcome back to the Sivana podcast. Today we are talking about childbirth, a topic very close to my heart as someone who gave birth just last year. And we have Izzy Adair on the show with us today. She's a certified birth doula and postpartum doula, a 500-hour certified yoga instructor specializing in pre- and postnatal yoga. She's also an Ayurvedic Wellness Counselor and student of women's Anthropology. Before we dive into our conversation with her today, I want to quickly remind you on how you can support the show, and your support really makes a difference. The number one way is by leaving a rating or review here on iTunes, and the second way is to make a purchase. Gift yourself or gift someone you love something from SivanaSpirit.com. SivanaSpirit.com supports this podcast. It also has a much larger social mission that I'm very passionate about, and you can get all the details on SivanaSpirit.com. They have very beautiful yoga clothing, healing jewelry, unique spiritual fair trade gifts, and it's a family-run company. I know I'm always trying to put my dollars towards family-owned businesses that really have a larger social mission as well. And I want to make sure that you know about the code podcast30. That's a coupon code that's going to get you 30% off your first order. So I introduced Izzy, and you may have heard the interview I did with her all about Ayurveda. If not, listen to that one as well. And today we're going to dive into talking about birth. Let's do it. Hi, Izzy. Thank you for coming back on the show today to talk to us about pregnancy and having an unmedicated natural birth. This is a hot topic. So first of all, why don't you tell us what is an unmedicated birth?
Yeah, so in general, as a birth worker, I try to avoid the term natural, and I prefer to use the term unmedicated. Unmedicated birth means not using any sort of intervention. So that could be a forceps delivery, a vacuum delivery, a cesarean. It also means not using pharmaceutical support, so not using Pitocin or epidural, any sort of pain relief medication.
I was about to say, for people listening, epidural equals pain relief. So
yes.
So this is interesting. And why is it that this word, because I guess this word natural, like comes up over and over again. That's kind of confusing about what it actually means. So you think when you work with your clients and talk to people who are interested in having a natural birth, you try to clarify with them that maybe what they're really interested in is an unmedicated birth.
Yeah, absolutely. Because first of all birth is natural and all birth is valid. I think the ability to have an unmedicated birth is a combination of luck, frankly, genetics, and disposition. So everything that goes into your experience as a woman, as like a body carrying a baby, whatever anxiety you might have, whatever trauma you might be carrying with you, all of that plays into what your birthing experience is going to be like. And from an Eastern perspective, you and your baby are going to have two individual karmas. Birth isn't just about your experience, it's about you and this baby making this transition towards life together. And that's a lot involved. And I think it's interesting because the whole pop term of natural birth that's kind of come about is right in line with this movement towards holistic health, which in a way is great, but as women living in Western culture, we've been told our entire lives to fear our body's natural processes. Like we've been told that our period's disgusting. We've been told that our smells are disgusting. They should be covered, that we need to shave our legs, that in so many ways we're taught to hate our bodies as young women, and those years are formative. So we're going through our lives as women, essentially being told that everything about our body as it is, naturally, as we were born, is wrong or is shameful. And then all of a sudden, people turn around when you're trying to have a baby and we're like, oh no, you have to do it natural. Even though you've been completely tuned out in what is good and what is normal for your body, now you have to do it without the support of anything else. Now you have to be able to tap into your intuition. And I just feel like it perpetuates this culture of shame that we are exposed to our entire lives as women or as femme-bodied individuals, which is pretty awful. So my hope is that before we start, I mean, an unmedicated birth is great. And if it happens, that's wonderful. There's so many benefits to it. But at the same time, it needs to not be a culture of shaming families and women having babies. I want everyone to feel supported and have the time to really do the work going into the birth to feel empowered in their experience, whatever decisions they end up making.
I think what you're talking about is so important because it is a little bit ridiculous that, as you say, we are so kind of body shamed our entire life as women. And then all of a sudden it comes time to have a baby and everyone's telling you like, oh, well, this can just be a natural process and just like tune into your intuition and like it should be easy. But the reality is we've sort of been tuning out. I mean, especially if you were on birth control before you got pregnant, you're completely unaware of what your natural body's rhythms would have been. So it's really asking a lot to say to women that they have to shift gears so drastically. And while, you know, natural sounds great, it sounds like it may also just not be the right fit depending on literally your baby's karma and how they need to come into the world. I felt that was really interesting. Can you say a little bit more about that?
Yeah. So I think, first of all, your bodies know so much. And I can't remember the name of the book, but Your Body Keeps Track. Have you ever read that? You know what I'm talking about?
No, but I'm going to put it on my reading list.
The body keeps track, or the body knows, but it's basically saying that our body holds on to trauma. So working with women and also just having obviously a lot of close friends who are women and from personal experiences, I know that trauma is a huge part of being a woman, sexual trauma especially. I mean, we know that 1 in 3 women are sexually assaulted during their lifetime. I think that was the most recent statistic I saw, which is pretty terrifying, but that has a huge relationship to how you're going to experience your body and how you're going to experience your birth. So if you have a trauma that you're carrying with you, I think it's really important to be generous and give yourself the time you need to recover, and so that you can actually trust your body again. And at the same time, trusting the life growing inside of you, trusting that it has its own path, and trusting, I think prenatal yoga is essential because it helps to facilitate this connection and this dialogue between the body carrying the baby and the baby, so that there's a communication going on, so that when your baby needs to change route, when your baby's saying, I can't come down through your pelvis because your pelvic floor is too tight, or because this isn't working for me, I'm ready to come out, it's time for a cesarean, the mom can make that call.
And not feel shame around that.
No, I was actually just at a birth and it was really amazing. It was really long. And the mom had been going for an unmedicated birth the entire time. But at some point she'd really been working with her body and with her babies. And at some point she just said, I need an epidural. This is the time. And we ended up being in a situation, the time that she made that call made it so that the exact care providers she needed were in the room. We found out later that the baby, for reasons unseen, needed to come out at that exact time. And it was just like this kind of divine intervention, that something had told her that her babies need to come forward, that she did need the use of pharmaceutical support. And it really served her. And the important thing was that she was able to make that call based on the information she was given prenatally, based on the trust in her own system, that she knew what was going on, so that she could advocate for herself and say, I know this is what I need, and I need my support team to step up. So really working with your path and your baby's path and making it this collaborative effort.
This is huge, because what you're sharing is that this idea of a natural birth is really about being connected to your own body, to your intuition, and to your baby. It's not about like whether you use a drug or not.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
And that's really big. I think a lot of the shaming that we do to each other as women and it's so nuts, right? It's so ridiculous, but it has to do with like natural equals, zero medication. And like what you're saying, if you're really in tune, you can have a C-section and feel totally confident in that decision because it's like your body was telling you that, well, that's what was right in the moment, or you were getting a signal from the baby that, you know, maybe something wasn't right, something needed to change, and you know, they needed to come out right that second. That's really, I think, empowering, but also intimidating for people because, as you said, as women, we're kind of tuned out of our feminine cycle and energy for most of our adult life. So how do people start to tune on this body awareness, whether they're trying to conceive or they're pregnant right now? Like, what are your tips for people?
I am a big fan of self-touch. I'm not talking specifically about masturbation. I mean, I think that's a really important practice as well, but just being comfortable with your body. So as a pregnant person, maybe that means just like taking some time to be quiet and laying your hands over your belly and feeling the movement of the life growing inside of you. Maybe taking time when you feel a kick or you feel a nudge to be responsive, make a mental note of where you felt it. Maybe imagine if that was a foot, if that was an elbow. You give your belly a little rub. Maybe you have an idea for where the baby's head or where their feet might be. Making little sweet connections like that and getting comfortable with the idea that this is your body. It is completely unique. Your needs are completely unique, and seeing that is a really powerful thing. I think going into birth, especially for people who have experienced trauma, and like I said, that's a lot of women, unfortunately, making sure that you are putting yourself in the environment that you feel the safest in. So for some women, they feel the safest at a hospital. Maybe they work in a hospital. Maybe they just trust doctors the most. They should be at a hospital. For someone who really trusts their midwife or who has a really great relationship with their midwife and they feel like that's the connection they need or that they feel the safest at home, and they're not scared about being at home without a doctor present or without the emergency materials they might need, then they should be at home. It depends on what environment you need to feel the safest and the most supported, what people you need in the room, what care providers you need in the room, and having a plan B and C just for any reason. As birth often goes off plan, you have another option that you've thought before the birth so that you can make, again, that informed, empowered decision for yourself.
I think this question that you're posing for people of where do you feel safest, the greatest question, because that's going to be really unique for each person. Because I feel like a lot of times as yoginis, right? Women who are into yoga, it's kind of hammered down that we have to have an unmedicated birth, that you have to have a home birth. Like these ideas are kind of drilled in as like what goes with a yogic or natural or holistic lifestyle. And that might not be true for everyone. Can you talk more about that? Do you agree with me?
Yeah, so I actually have so many feelings about this topic specifically. I think in our culture as yoginis, there is still a lot of shame. I think we're living in a culture that's extremely critical of the way we look, of the way our body is shaped, of our cellulite, of the color of our skin or the shape of the curls on our head. And at the same time, we're trying to live a practice that makes you, that encourage you to separate yourself from that. And that's really hard to do. So I think there's a lot of pressure to still be a Western body in so many ways and to subscribe to all these norms, but at the same time, be in tune to your body's natural way of being, which is really challenging. And it's interesting because if you talk to prenatal yoga instructors about their clients, you hear a lot that women who've been doing yoga, especially the ones who do like really intense power classes with like a lot of abdominal toning, a lot of work of the bandhas, end up having a pelvic floor that is so tight that they end up needing a cesarean, because the pelvic floor it's important to be really strong, but it's equally as important for it to be supple. And a lot of yoga teachers, as well as high performance athletes, dancers, have a super tight pelvic floor. So then the baby can't actually physically make the descent it needs to as it starts to twist and come down. So you have, on one hand, people who have a lot of anxiety as yoginis about the way their birth should be. And then you also have these bodies that have been working essentially too hard, have been focusing their entire lives on being tight and toned instead of finding that balance and knowing when to relax. And a lot of birth is about surrender. You are surrendering to forces that you don't understand. I mean, there's so much going on. It's a dramatically different experience of sensation than anything anyone's ever had if they've never had a baby. And in a lot of ways, it requires surrender and trust.
I think that's so interesting what you're saying, because as yoginis, as you're saying, it's like we're a little bit in a tough spot when it comes to birth with this outside pressure. And then like what you're saying, like we might be very physical, which again is good. But if we're not cultivating that surrender side, the kind of sukha to match the stira, we're too tightly wound to really surrender to birth and find that softness that's so needed. I think this is a really, really important message. Before I'm letting you go anywhere, I feel like we need to also talk about this in relation to breastfeeding, because that is another huge topic where breastfeeding is what's natural. It's really pushed as the thing that, you have to be doing. But many women struggle, and that can be another, all of a sudden that is now a place where people are being shamed potentially. What are your thoughts on that?
Oh, Brett, we could do so many more podcasts just on this subject. So let me start by saying that breast milk is liquid gold. It is, we know from just about every avenue that breast milk is essential, or not essential, but it is the best option when it's readily available. But at the same time, so just like how we're told to move towards this like natural way of being in birth when our entire lives we've been told the opposite, breastfeeding, all of a sudden someone's telling us to know exactly what to do with a baby. When we grow up in these nuclear isolated communities our entire lives, we don't see women breastfeeding out at the grocery store in our backyard. We don't grow up holding our nieces and nephews, watching our mother breastfeed, watching our cousins breastfeed. We're just removed as a culture from birth enough that we don't really get to see what it looks like day to day. And we also don't really have that continuous support of a family living with our aunts, living with our mothers, our sisters, that a lot of cultures have had throughout history, where women were taught how to breastfeed from their closest relatives, from their neighbors, where they had seen it their entire lives. So it wasn't foreign. It wasn't as much of a challenge. And just there's this essential support in that first 6 weeks, especially navigating breastfeeding, that we don't get as women in this culture. If you are exceptionally lucky and you can afford a postpartum doula, or if your area has a breastfeeding clinic that your insurance covers, that's great. But a lot of people don't have that. And we see that a lot, especially in lower income communities, where women are sent home from the hospital with little to no resources. And breastfeeding is really challenging if you haven't seen it done, if you don't have someone there mentoring and supporting you. And if some moms just get it and the baby's ready and it works, and that's great. But for a lot of people, that doesn't happen. I've even seen that happen with like a lot of birth workers and a lot of people who, lactation consultants and doulas, yoginis who've been around this idea of breastfeeding and how it works, and who've taken all the classes and all the courses, and they still have a challenging time.
Yeah, and just to chime in here too, I have so many people who tell me that, they go to these wonderful hospitals that have all this breastfeeding and lactation support. But what that support actually looks like is like different nurses just coming in and telling you completely different things about how to breastfeed for like an intense 72-hour period, and then you're sent home, right? So it almost, in some ways I feel like women tell me it almost is less helpful because they're told contradictory things, and at the same time it starts undermining their own intuition about maybe what's right or how to go about doing this.
Yeah. So in the last couple of years, I've been to a couple births with forceps deliveries or with other forms of intervention, and the mothers who were struggling in the breastfeeding period found that what they needed more than anything was to have body work done on their baby. And I feel like there's not a lot of attention given to that. But birth, especially with the use of interventions, can be really hard on the baby's system. I mean, they are very fragile. And sometimes just having some light craniosacral work or some light chiropractic by a professional who specializes in this can be really helpful, because the baby needs to have the right alignment to get a good latch. And a good latch is essential to making sure that the nipple doesn't get tugged on, so that it's not irritated, so that you don't get an infection. Latch is so important, and a lot of that has to do with the baby's disposition. So I think that breastfeeding, just like pregnancy, is very much an act of mindfulness. I think babies will communicate with you in really subtle and interesting ways, and to tune into these subtle communications, observing your baby, really being present, staying off of your phone while you're breastfeeding or when you're carrying them around, really seeing how they communicate with you, because infants will give you pretty specific feeding cues, and they change from infant to infant. But a lot of babies will kind of pucker their lips, or maybe stick out their tongue, or maybe do kind of a funky stretch when they're starting to crave when they're ready to eat, essentially, and when it's the best time to get them on. Because if you try to get a baby on a latch when it's really upset and really frustrated, especially if you haven't had a good latch in the past, it's going to be more challenging for them to find that place to relax and really soften into breastfeeding. So it's a collaborative effort between you and your baby. I think if you can afford it, if your insurance covers it, or if you can get your friends and family to put some money together during your baby shower for a lactation consultant or a postpartum doula, that's huge. I would highly recommend a postpartum doula, even if you don't want a birth doula or don't feel like you need one, just because we really lack that community support that women and families need to thrive in the postpartum period.
I know people just hear that breastfeeding is what's natural, and then the association is that breastfeeding should be easy, but a lot of the time it's not. And I really love your tip about considering getting baby body work done, like craniosacral, or, I'm a huge fan of myofascial release and unwinding, and you can do that with newborns. And it's amazing, especially because the newborns, they know how to unwind and self-heal and self-correct. They're just so tapped in. So I think that's a really great tip. What other advice do you have for yoginis who are going into this process of either getting pregnant or being pregnant? I know you talked about getting a postpartum doula. I think this clarification of natural compared to unmedicated is very important. You talked about the importance of body awareness, touching yourself. Maybe if you're a hardcore yogini, focusing on softening, right? And then getting really connected to the energy of your baby, because the baby's your partner in this dance. And I know that's something I did during my pregnancy. And if anyone's pregnant and listening, I even have some videos on YouTube that you can do where I teach you how to meditate and kind of get connected to your baby, ask them questions. I very much asked my baby like how he was feeling, how did he want to be birthed? Like I just listened for answers from him. And I found that to be really comforting, because there's so much uncertainty around birth. So the more you can just get connected with your baby or practice that connection, I think it's really important.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. I think prenatal yoga is huge because you really take time out of your day to facilitate that connection. Whether or not you do much yoga in the first place, it could be really great for that. And also because it's a wonderful place to cultivate your community of other mamas and or other parents and share your experience, which I think is huge during pregnancy and moving into postpartum period. Like having people and community members to check in with, not ones that are just going to like blindly throw information at you, because sometimes that can be overwhelming, or negative stories that you don't need to hear, but ones that really can offer support in whatever way you need it.
Yeah, and I'd add into that, I think, a tip, which is not just to befriend mamas who are pregnant at the same time as you, but try to find someone who is 3 months ahead of you in the process. Because I know for me, that's been so huge and so helpful, because babies change so fast and everything you need to know is changing so fast, that if you can kind of have like a mom mentor or someone who's just a couple months ahead of you in the process, I think right around 3 months ahead of you is the best, because someone who's like 6 months ahead of you, they've already forgotten like what it is that you're about to be going through. And I know for me, that's been huge. And then it's really fun because I'm able to kind of be that mentor for some of my friends who, got pregnant, 3 or 4 months after me. So not just your peers, but kind of setting up that mentorship network, I think can be huge.
Yeah. And cost is a very real thing for a lot of families, but honestly, you do not need a million onesies. You do need good postpartum support. You might need really good birth doula support. So asking for that, maybe sharing tidbit websites with your family members if they don't really understand it, be like, this is what I really need going into my baby shower. This is how I'd really love for you to support me. And a lot of families who can't be there for the birth are happy to do it.
Amazing. Before we let you go, just what are kind of the most common questions you get asked from yoginis that you work with who are considering an unmedicated birth, and what do you tell them? Because I'm sure there's people listening to this podcast who are in that situation. I
would not put a lot of pressure on yourself. I think pressure and expectations can create a lot of anxiety. Create a plan for yourself, like a plan A, B, and C, not that you expect the birth to go a certain way, but just kind of getting on paper the things that are important to you about like what your space would look like optimally, what your support people look like, smells, what kind of touch, maybe if you want to put photographs of your older child in the room, if you got an epidural, what would that look like? You got a cesarean, would you want the baby on your chest right after? Do you want them to do a microbiome swab to put on the baby's cheek? All of that. So I think that's really important, to just kind of put out there what you want your birth to look like if it went, again, plan A, B, and C. Yeah, taking time to relax, taking time to connect to your partner. Honestly, one of the best things you can do, if it feels safe and sweet, going into labor is to stimulate the flow of natural oxytocin. So that could be, hanging out with your dog if that feels comforting. It could be cuddling with your partner. It could be engaging in intimate activities, whatever gets that natural oxytocin flowing. Because again, something they commonly use in hospitals to stimulate birth, to move contractions along, is Pitocin, which is a synthetic form of oxytocin, which our bodies will readily produce given the right circumstance.
I love it. Thank you for the tips. And I think, a big takeaway is that natural isn't better or worse. It's really about self-inquiry and getting connected to your intuition and getting connected to your baby. And I know that for me, that Kundalini yoga was huge in terms of getting connected to my intuition. And I mean, there's so much we could share about that, but for folks who are pregnant and they want to not just do prenatal yoga for their body, but really go deep into this kind of like connection with self and connection with baby, you can check out Kundalini yoga as well. And I have resources about that on my website. Izzy, how can moms and pregnant ladies, how can they best connect with you online? And I definitely would suggest that they follow your Instagram. So maybe you can just give them that info and anything else that you think they should know if they want to learn more from you.
Yeah, so unfortunately, I can't do doula. I don't travel for doula services outside the Asheville area. But if they have questions about what it looks like to have doula care, if they want to learn more about doula care, they can always send me an email. My information's on my Instagram page, which is Holistic Birth and Wellness. And my website is a great way to get a hold of me as well. I talk more about Ayurveda and what prenatal yoga means to the body. And that's www.holisticbirthandwellness.com. And I'm always happy to do Ayurvedic prenatal consultations via Skype and Zoom. And I'm also happy to talk over your experience if you really just want to check in with a postpartum doula. And I'm happy to get together recipes for you, talk to you about optimizing your support network, all that good stuff.
Yeah, sometimes just talking your birth story through with the right type of person, I think can be really, really healing for folks. So I'll also put all that information in the show notes. Izzy, thank you so much for coming on the show. And listeners, if you enjoyed this episode, make sure to leave a rating or review here on iTunes. It really helps support the show and get all of this information in front of more people looking to improve their life through yoga, meditation, and conscious living. So take a moment to do that now if you haven't already. I hope you have a beautiful day. So much love from our hearts to yours. Namaste.
You've been listening to the Sivana podcast. To find out more about Sivana, go to SivanaSpirit.com or follow Sivana on Facebook at Facebook.com/Sivana Spirit. For daily inspiration, check out our blog at SivanaEast.com. Be sure to join us next week for a new episode. And thank you for listening to the Sivana podcast.